This is the Marketing Podcast Network.
Stories influence, teach, and inspire us. But what about the storytellers who create them? Uncorking a Story profiles storytellers to uncover how their background and life experiences influence the stories they create. We learn what motivates them, their path to success, and what fuels them to keep creating. It all starts by asking one simple question: where does your story begin? Welcome to Uncorking a Story. Now here's your host, Mike Carlin.
Well, hello and welcome to Uncorking a Story. I'm your host, Mike Carlin, and today I'm excited to introduce you to Lynne Hugo. Lynne is a National Endowment for the Arts Fellowship recipient who has also received repeat individual artist grants from the Ohio Arts Council and the Kentucky Foundation for Women. Her publications include 10 novels, as well as a memoir, Where the Trail Grows Faint, which won the Riverteeth Creative Nonfiction Book Prize. She joins me today on Uncorking a Story to discuss her career and her 11th novel, The Language of Kin. Welcome to Uncorking a Story, Lynne.
Thank you, Mike. I'm really happy to be here.
Well, I'm happy to have you here, and I'm curious, where does your story as an author begin?
I think there are a couple of places. The earliest I ever remember identifying that I wanted to be a writer was telling my aunt, who I think was the first person who ever asked me with any serious intent. And I remember I was in fourth grade and I gave her this elaborate example of a metaphor that I was going to use in my first book. And I didn't, because it was ridiculous. But she took me very seriously, which is, I think, a gift that adults in a child's life can give them. And she said that she thought I would be an excellent writer because I was very good with words, and that she thought I had talent, and but it wasn't patronizing. So I remember that. And then in high school, I was on a literary magazine, and I had a couple of poems published in national but student writer magazines. And then, you know how way goes on to way. And in college, I did a double major in English and psychology, and I kept hearing my parents echo in my head. You have to be able to make a living. You have to have you have to know that you can make a living. That was extremely important to them. And of course, they were footing most of the bill for my college. So, I set it aside and didn't go directly to writing, but went to graduate school to become a social worker. And then I did more studying in that and became licensed as a therapist. So, and then I got married and I had kids. So the next that I really went back to writing was when my kids were just old enough that I could do some short pieces without thinking that one of them was going to either burn the house down or kill the other one. And I do mean short pieces. So as they grew, then I went from poetry, short lyrics, which were being published. And I was very fortunate that I was able to get published in literary magazines pretty quickly. And then as they got older, I went to short stories. And as they got older, I tried my hand with a novel. So that's really the story, but I think it's something I always wanted to do. And if you really think about what, therapists are constructing, as helping people construct a story that to revise their own story and to make creative changes in their lives. So to me, they fit together.
Yeah. I want to go back to fourth grade because that's when, you kind of mentioned
Yeah.
that, you had, it was an aunt who recognized some talent in you, and you were kind of pitching a metaphor to her. What
Yes.
was the metaphor you were pitching to her in fourth grade?
Oh my gosh, I even do remember it, and I'm surprised you would think to ask that. That's a good question. It was something about a character named Ken, and no, it didn't have anything to do with Ken as in Ken and Barbie, but how there was something he really wanted, and his hopes rose like a thermometer that was brought in from the winter day and put near a radiator, and his hope shot up like the mercury on that thermometer.
That's
And
pretty intense for someone in fourth grade. What kind of school were you in?
a public school, just a public school. Um, yeah, I mean, I don't remember what story I thought that would fit into, or I mean, that's all I remember about it.
I also love how you mentioned, going to college and the practicality of, finding a career that's going to pay the bills. Because I mean, writing doesn't even pay a lot of bills for people who do it for a living.
And
That,
no true.
in other words, it's a tough way to make a living, especially when you're starting out. Love the combination of psychology and English, though. I was a psych major myself because
Were
my
you?
my goal was to go out and become psychologist or psychiatrist, and I did neither. I wound up working in advertising for the same reason, though. It was because my dad said, "Hey, you've got to be able to make a living, and do you really want to be in school for the next 8 years getting a PhD?" Which is really what I was leaning towards. So I kind of feel that too, that there's this pull towards practicality, but I mean, there is a little voice in the back of my head that says, well, what would have happened if you actually did follow that passion? Um, I don't know. I don't know. But yeah, the other thing I wanted to touch on was, how you saying, working as a therapist, you're helping people rewrite or recreate sort of the stories of their lives. I'd love to just hear a little bit more about that because that sounds pretty fascinating.
Well, it's less rewriting because you as a writer, you can just you can take a chapter, you can take a section, you can take any part of what you're writing and hit delete and literally rewrite it. It doesn't exist anymore. But with people dealing with their lives and their pasts, you it's there. It's been lived. But somebody can take the direction that the novel of their life is headed and replot the direction it's going, or even the direction it is already being written, and try to revise relationships. You can you can replot planned actions, and you can revise relationships. And true, some relationships can be deleted from your life, but also some relationships can be written into your life or written back into your life. So, if you think of the lives we live as the story of our lives, then I, I think that people can be more or less creative with how they live their lives.
Yeah, I love that notion of replotting. Because you're right, you can't really change or edit the past. You might be able to process it differently or reframe events
Exactly.
maybe to be more positively, but you can't change what's happened, but you can change what will happen or might happen, uh,
Right.
and
And
the way you approach it.
you can also look into the past and look to look for what the themes have been and maybe change your point of view change your interpretation or modify, maybe not completely change, but modify your interpretation of what something meant and how does it need to continue affecting the rest of the story in the same way.
Yeah. Well, speaking of stories, what can you share with us about your latest, The Language of Kin?
Well, the language of kin deals with a fundamental ethical conflict between two zookeepers. Um, their names are Kate and Mark. Mark short for Marco. And what the conflict is over is how to help a young, terrified chimpanzee acclimate to this a fictional zoo. I wouldn't want anybody to think this is set in an actual zoo, although I did a tremendous amount of research about how zoos work. So Eve, which is the name of the chimpanzee, had been caught as a baby in Uganda and sold to an American medical lab, which has been very, very common. So she was subjected in the medical lab to years of painful medical experiments. So by the time she arrives at the zoo, which is very, very shortly after the opening of the novel, she's thoroughly traumatized. She's been caged alone, isolated. And so Kate and Mark, they come at it very, very differently about what is the correct thing to do. Both have very valid arguments. These are not petty or shallow ways of looking at this ethical conflict. Both of them happen to also be the only child of what has ended up being a medically dependent mother. So they also have that pressure on them, but they don't know that about each other at the time. And so for a while, they managed to work together because they're tasked with acclimating this baby, this young chimp to the zoo. And they work at, they manage it until a life-threatening crisis happens at the zoo. And then not so much.
Well, it sounds intriguing. How did this story come to you?
Well, it's was one of those confluence of a number of streams meeting and forming a river, and then it just became a novel I had to write. There was a chimpanzee in, or maybe it was a gorilla. I'm sorry, I honestly don't remember. Might have been a gorilla, but it doesn't matter. It was one of the primates, one of the great apes, who was shot at the Cincinnati Zoo.
Was that Harambe?
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I remember that story. Yeah.
Yes. After there was an accidental incursion into his enclosure area by I believe it was a child. I'm sure it was a child. So that always bothered me because I had read about how terribly upset the zookeepers, his particular keepers, were by that, saying this was a gentle primate, that they were at the time pretty confident that he had no intention of doing anything to the child. But it was protocol. So that was one thing. Then the other thing was I have young grandchildren, and on a couple of occasions I had taken them to a zoo, both in Cincinnati and Louisville. And, I did find it, for me, and not that it should be for anybody else, I found it upsetting to see particularly the primates and maybe also the great, the great cats, the large cats, in what I thought were relatively small cages with people staring at them, and knowing how foreign this was to how they live in the wild. Then the third thing is that I live in a university town, and a lot of my friends are university professors. And one of them is an anthropologist with a specialty in primates who's done a lot of field work in Uganda and Kenya. And I was asking her some questions about this, and it turns out she has actively worked with chimpanzees in Uganda. And so that got me really interested. And I learned about how they are captured by poachers in protected areas while the mothers are in nursing parties. And the way they capture the babies is they kill all the mothers and then kidnap the babies, sell them at market to middlemen who sell them to medical labs and to people who want to raise them as pets, which is wildly inappropriate.
Yeah, we had a situation here. I live in Connecticut, in Stamford, Connecticut, and there
I'm
was.
from Canaan.
Are you really? Oh, no
I
kidding.
am.
Oh, wow.
New
Yeah.
England girl.
Yeah, no, my sister and my late brother, both in New Canaan. But there was a woman who had a pet chimpanzee, and his name was Travis, and he wound up feeling threatened by one of her a friend of hers, and he just like basically tore her face off.
Yeah.
And it's like, these are not pets. They're not supposed to. You're not supposed to have these things as pets. But yeah, it's see that's probably where I would start the story. Just given where I live. But
Yeah.
Anyway.
No way. I understand, and I'm familiar with that story too. What happens is people get them as babies and dress them in baby clothes and feed them with bottles and think they're going to raise them as part of the family. And then they come into their adolescence and their strengths, and they're not living the way they would in the wild. And, chimps live in very social family groups. They share parenting. They are very loyal, and they use tools. They're very, very smart. And they have 98% the same, it's actually more than 98%. It's close to 99% the same DNA as humans.
Yeah, which is probably why they're so sought after from the medical community.
Well, exactly. It's now become the medical testing has become illegal, which is why there was a scramble to find zoos to take them. But many of them were very traumatized by what happened to them in the medical. They're just, a lot of for the most part, the experimentation was very painful, and they were isolated in small cages, no contact with other chimps, and no good contact with humans.
I imagine, just given how much DNA we share, any human in that circumstance would suffer from PTSD. So I'm curious, do chimpanzees and primates suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder as well?
Yes.
Yeah, I can see where maybe that could be a plot point. From a therapist author.
Well, the novel is, in being honest, it is a human story, and the human characters dominate the story. But there's a lot of it that's about communication in general, and not just animal human, and the human animal bond and connection, because you know how a lot of people feel they bond in a certain way with animals, and it's very meaningful. Ask me about my dog, you know. um, but also in the novel, there is a deaf character. There is a character with what's called primary aphasia, which is the loss of the ability to understand and process words, but without dementia. So the person is fully present and cognizant in their mind, but we need to understand they don't have language to express or process it. And then there's also a character with mid-level autism who is fully human and has all the range of human emotions and reactions, but without the language skills to express those. So what I really wanted to do was look at communication in all of, it's probably not all, but in many different ways. How is it accomplished? So I incorporated American Sign Language, and how can that be used? So it's about a lot of things that all I believe, tie together to a human story.
Yeah. Well, it sounds fascinating to me.
Thank you.
I know we can't talk about it too much more because we do want people to buy it, not spoil anything. So we will pause talk on the language of kin and move into another topic that I like to get into with my guests, which is pop culture. This is one way in which I get to know my guests a little bit more. So I'm curious,
Okay.
Lynn, thinking about when you were growing up, maybe it was when you were in fourth grade, pitching those those metaphors to your aunt. What were some of your favorite things to watch on TV when you were growing up?
Oh, Lord. Okay. Ones um, I remember being hooked on Perry Mason. Uh, I must have been a little older. Um, when I was a kid, um, uh, uh, Roy Rogers. Oh, Annie Oakley. Um, hmm, um, oh, it was Roy Rogers, Dale Evans. They went off the air though pretty soon. Maverick. Um,
Was that
I can
James
still
Garner?
I can still sing the Maverick song. Don't ask me to, because everybody would immediately turn their radio or um, their device off. Do I remember who?
Was Maverick James Garner? Was he in that? Am I remembering that correctly or no?
Um, I couldn't tell you. I have
That's
no
okay. It's
idea.
okay. It's okay.
Also Zorro. I remember Zorro. And who was the guy that were Hi Ho Silver?
The Lone
Was
Ranger.
that Lone Ranger? That was Lone Ranger. Okay. Okay.
Oh, yeah. You mentioned Perry Mason. Did you watch the sort of reimagined series on HBO with Matthew Rhys as Perry Mason?
I have not watched it yet, but I have a relative who has a part in it.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yes, well, obviously he's an actor, who lives in Hollywood, but, I know he's in it. I've seen clips of him, um, but I have not watched that yet. I've just been this has been a very busy time for me.
Absolutely. Well, I would highly recommend it, and so go support that relative of yours and watch Perry.
Oh,
Man.
yes. Yes.
What about music when you were growing up? What did you like to listen to?
Yes. Okay. I remember being very young, like early, or I remember the names. I remember that sometime in elementary school, Elvis got really big. Of the Everly Brothers. And then at some point, the Beatles, and what was her name? The one who sang, oh shoot. See, I remember some of the songs, but I don't remember who sang them. I didn't really get into music until the 60s, I would say. And then if you start naming people, I say, oh yeah.
Well, that's when music certainly changed a lot.
Yes. And those are those, that's what I remember.
Yeah.
I really don't remember much.
Do you
I know I was aware of Elvis because everybody was aware, and my parents did not approve.
He took the country by storm. With those pelvis swinging hips and all that stuff.
I guess
the older generation was afraid. They were afraid of him. Elvis the Pelvis, they call. How about this? Do you have a favorite place where you like to read?
I always read in bed at night because I can use my iPad and I can put a black background with off-white print. And so I read for a long time and my husband sleeps for a long time. So then the light doesn't bother him. I got in the habit of doing that years ago. And other than that, I like to read out on the porch in the summertime, or curled up on the couch by a fire in the wintertime.
Do you have a favorite place to write?
Oh, it always here in my study at the computer. I like my place. Yeah.
I see a number of items over your left shoulder, I guess. What are some of those items? There's certainly one on the top next to a trophy. Looks like the inspiration perhaps to the language of kin, or
I think it was last Christmas or maybe the Christmas before. My husband bought a paid to support a chimp at one of the sanctuaries in America, like Chimp Haven or something like that, and they sent one of those as a token. Then over this shoulder, those are just prints of my book covers, missing the language of kin, which I asked my husband to print for me, but he hasn't gotten to it yet. And then what else is up there? Oh, it's actually not a trophy. It's two wine bottles. One is a wine bottle that somebody gave me, well, with wine in it. The wine is titled The Storyteller.
Oh, nice.
And the other one is a bottle that previously had wine in it, called, and the title of the wine is Hannah, and my last lab's name was Hannah.
Oh, that's sweet. The blue bottle, is that a Saratoga Springs sparkling water by any chance?
Yes, I think so.
I can recognize it. I consume that stuff by the case.
Do you?
It's like my drink of choice these days. Well, one last question for you, which is, I call it Dear Younger Me, which just imagine yourself being able to write your younger self a letter. What would you write your younger? Maybe it's that fourth grader, with the thermometer metaphor. What would you If you could whisper some things into her ear, what would you tell her?
I think I would say, I would take Mitch McConnell's criticism of Elizabeth Warren and use it as a piece of advice. Persist. Don't have more, maybe it's more confidence. Don't be discouraged by someone saying that's not a good idea. I mean, it's not that I think what my dad said was wrong, in that I got a tremendous amount out of that education, and the work that I've done has very much, it's been very meaningful. But I should not have just set writing aside.
Yeah.
I didn't persist. I just said, well, that's obviously not going to work. And I wish I had said, that may not work as a full-time gig right now, but I can make 2 or 3 hours a week for that.
And of course, persistence is necessary when you're trying to get published, because there's a lot of rejection along the way.
You're so right.
For many people. I don't want to speak for everybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
That comes with the territory, and persistence will pay off. So there we have it. Well, we've been talking to Lynne Hugo. The book is The Language of Kin. Lynne, I assume it's available wherever books are sold?
Correct.
All right.
I invite people to take a look at my website, because there's some wonderful pictures on the website. It was just LynneHugo.com, Lynne with an E on it.
All right. LynneHugo.com. And then any social media places where you're active, Lynne, where we could share with the audience?
Oh, that would be great. I have a Facebook readers page, which is just Lynne Hugo readers page on Facebook. I have an Instagram account, which is Lynne Hugo author. Those are really the main ones. I have a Twitter account, but I'm not particularly active on it.
Fair enough. Well, I'll be sure to put all of those links in our show notes for people who are listening, and they can just go right to the notes and find out how to find you. Well, Lynne, this was been a fun conversation. Thank you for stopping by Uncorking a Story and letting me uncork yours.
Thank you. I really, really enjoyed talking with you.
Thanks for listening to Uncorking a Story. If you'd like more information about today's guest or to find out more about Mike, go to uncorkingastory.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review us at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in every week to hear Mike Carlin uncork a new story.